Hey, what is going on, guys? Lon here from Android Authority, and apparently the race for the thinnest smartphone in the world is still a thing for some companies, but how thin is too thin? Well, this is the Oppo R5, and we're going to find out if it strikes a perfect balance between form and function, or if its sleek looks isn't without sacrifices. Oppo doesn't have a huge presence in the US, but they've certainly been making headlines the last couple of years by pushing boundaries when it comes to smartphone design. They're also known for making phones with some awesome build quality, and the R5 is no exception. With the design of the R5, you're looking at a phone made of very premium materials. The front is entirely made of glass, the sides are wrapped in a metal frame, and the back is also metal with the exception of the plastic inserts on the top and bottom, which are most likely there to improve reception. In the hand, the R5 feels extremely sleek, and the metal body gives it that really nice cold feel when you first pick it up in the morning. It's also not slippery to hold, which you might think it would be because of how much metal there is, but because the sides are flat, it's really easy to hold onto. The biggest story about the R5's design though is how thin it is. The R5 comes in at an insanely thin 4.85 millimeters, making it one of the thinnest smartphones, if not the thinnest in the world. In fact, the R5 is so thin the camera protrudes quite a bit from the body. This could potentially cause concern with durability for some people because of how exposed it is, but so far I haven't had any problems. Also, if you like texting with your phone flat on a table, you might be annoyed by how it rocks back and forth. Taking a tour around the R5, you'll find the power and volume keys on the right, which are also made of metal, and they're very nice and clicky and perfectly placed where my thumb can easily reach them, so no problems there. On the bottom is a micro USB port with a microphone, and along the top you'll find nothing. It's completely blank. Same story goes with the left side of the phone. It's almost entirely blank with the exception of your SIM card slot towards the bottom. At this point, you're probably wondering where's the 3.5mm headset jack and where's the dedicated speaker? Well, the truth is, with the R5 being so thin, there simply wasn't room to fit a 3.5mm headset jack or a dedicated speaker. This is clearly a conscious decision by Oppo to go with form over function, but that doesn't mean listening to audio is not possible. If you want to listen to music using earbuds, you can still do so, but you'll have to use the proprietary earbuds included in the box. These proprietary earbuds plug directly into the micro USB port, and they work and sound just as if it was plugged into a 3.5mm headset jack. The biggest downside to this is obviously the fact that you can't use your own earbuds or headphones, and while these earbuds aren't going to give you the best audio experience, it's still better than nothing at all. If you'd like to listen to audio without earbuds, you can still do that too, because the earpiece on the R5 actually doubles as an external speaker. The quality is pretty average and sounds about the same as any other phone with a single speaker, but I did find it to be a little on the quiet side. On the front of the R5, you're looking at a 5.2-inch AMOLED display coming in at 1080p resolution, and the display looks just as good as the rest of the phone. We know at this point that Quad HD is the future of smartphone displays, but you won't find much to complain about with the R5's display. Colors are vibrant and saturated, viewing angles are great, whites look perfectly white, and since this is an AMOLED display, you're going to get those really deep blacks that you just can't get with an LCD. The display is capable of getting really bright, which is great for outdoor visibility, but I noticed it also gets pretty dim, so you don't have to strain your eyes when trying to read at night. Inside of the Oppo R5, you're going to find a Snapdragon 615 and 2 gigs of RAM. If you're not familiar with the Snapdragon 615, this is an octa-core 64-bit processor, but don't be fooled by the number of cores. This is a mid-tier processor from Qualcomm, and the R5 is still running on 32-bit software, so it's not taking full advantage of the processor, at least not yet. Regardless of that, it's still a great performer, apps open quickly, animations are smooth, and high-end games run fine without any lag or drop frames. Multitasking is fine too, but it is a little slow due to the fact that you have to long press the menu button every time you want to switch between apps, but this really has more to do with poor implementation than actual performance. The only real problem I've had with the performance is the keyboard. If you want to use any other keyboard besides the default keyboard, you can't. And if you try to switch keyboards, it causes the R5 to soft boot every single time. This can most likely be fixed with a software update, so I won't be too harsh on it, but it's still annoying nonetheless. Taking a closer look at the camera, we have a 13 megapixel Sony sensor with an LED flash, and starting with the camera interface, you'll find that it's a very simple, clean, and intuitive interface. There isn't much in terms of manual controls outside of expert mode, so taking photos and videos is relatively straightforward. The camera settings are tucked away in the bottom left corner, and there's a slide out panel on the right for all your different shooting modes with an option to download more than what comes pre-installed. With that being said, the app can be a little bit cumbersome to use, at least when shooting in landscape, because not everything rotates to landscape orientation. The camera settings, for example, stay locked in portrait, so every time I wanted to change something in the settings, I either had to deal with reading everything sideways or flipping the phone back to portrait. The same thing can be said with the beautify mode. You'll notice that none of the faces or text rotates to landscape, and it just creates for a very inconsistent and frustrating experience when you have to constantly flip the phone back and forth between portrait and landscape. On the plus side, the camera does have a pretty fast shutter, so it's really easy to rapidly fire off some shots in succession, but the picture quality isn't so impressive. With 13 megapixels, the camera is capable of capturing plenty of detail, but it has a tendency to overexpose, resulting in a lot of overblown highlights. Indoors is certainly better, and you will get a little more color and detail, but it definitely takes some practice to get exactly what you're looking for. Shooting in normal mode will also result in some poor looking low light shots with an increase in noise levels and softer details, which is very surprising for a lens with an f2.0 aperture, but Oppo has included a slow shutter mode that keeps the shutter open a lot longer to pull in more light, and it actually works quite well. Photos are brighter and sharper with a lot less noise, but you'll want to be careful with this feature because if you don't have a steady hand, it will result in a blurry photo. Ultra HD mode, which has been a staple feature for Oppo for a while now, also makes a return here on the R5, allowing you to take 50 megapixel photos. It's really just a neat software trick that stitches a series of images together, but it does work. The images definitely are sharper and more detailed than the default 13 megapixel photos, so it is worth using, but I wouldn't recommend using it on anything other than still objects because it does take a little bit of time for the camera to process the image. The 50 megapixel shots also weigh in at around 10 megabytes a piece, and with only 16 gigabytes on board and no micro SD card expansion, you could run out of space before you know it. Moving on to the battery, you're looking at a 2000 milliamp hour battery, and in 2014 this is considered an extremely small battery. And earlier I mentioned that Oppo made a very conscious decision to go with form over function, and the battery life really takes a hit because of this. This is the first phone that I've used in a very long time where I can literally describe the battery life as being terrible. I mean, it is awful battery life. I'm getting between 10 to 12 hours off the charger and only 1.5 to 2 hours of screen on time, maybe 2.5 hours if I'm lucky. And don't get me wrong, I love the thin and sleek design of the R5. It's beautiful, but I would not have minded if the phone was just a little bit thicker with a slightly larger battery, because I don't know about you, but battery life is not something that I'd be willing to sacrifice just so I could have a thinner phone. The good news is the R5 supports Oppo's VOOC rapid charging technology, meaning you can get a 75% charge in 30 minutes time, but I wasn't able to take advantage of it due to the charging brick not being a US charger. But considering it's only a 2000 milliamp hour battery, I was still able to get a pretty fast charge by using a 1.5 to 2 amp charger. In terms of software, the R5 is running on Android 4.4 KitKat with Oppo's own ColorOS. It's ColorOS version 2.0 to be specific, and for the most part it hasn't changed much in terms of aesthetics from previous versions. It's still very colorful as the name suggests, but the settings menu has now taken on a much darker look with colored icons, and the gesture panel, which used to be accessible with a swipe down on the top left corner of the screen, is now at the bottom. I personally like the move to the bottom because it's much easier to get to and I don't have to worry about accidentally swiping it down every time I reach for the notification shade. The gesture panel still works just like before with some pre-made gestures for apps like the camera and flash, and you can also create your own gestures for any application you want. You can even trigger these gestures with the screen off so you can access your apps much quicker. Oppo has also built in tap to wake, and while the power button is already really easy to reach, the tap to wake is still a handy feature to have, especially when it's just sitting on a table and you just want to quickly check the time. There's also some very Samsung-esque features built in, like air gestures, so you can wave your hand over the phone to scroll through home screens and photos in your gallery, but I found it to be extremely sensitive. So sensitive that even if I were to just tilt the phone the wrong way, it would scroll, so I just kept it turned off. The theme app is probably one of my favorite features in ColorOS. It allows you to change the look of the icons, folders, wallpaper, and lock screen. So if you don't like the way ColorOS looks by default, you can change that. It's a very well fleshed out app, and there's a lot of themes to pick from, so you should be able to find at least a few that suits your taste. As of this video, Oppo hasn't announced a release date just yet, but once it does come out, it'll be available for $500. Just keep in mind that Oppo doesn't release their phones in the US, so if you're inside the US and you want to pick one up, you'll have to import it through sites like eBay. It does have 3G and LTE connectivity, but according to Oppo's site, there's a couple of different versions with different band support, so you'll want to make sure to grab the one that works best with your carrier. And that is going to do it for the Oppo R5. The R5 is beautiful, very well made, and one of the thinnest smartphones in the world, but having a phone this thin isn't without its compromises. And if you're willing to live with those compromises, like a lack of a 3.5mm headset jack, a dedicated speaker, and less than desirable battery life, then you will love the R5. But for me personally, the compromises are just too great for the R5's good looks to overcome. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching this review. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up down below, and also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already. And don't forget to check out our website for more in-depth coverage. You already know what it is, AndroidAuthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.